bringing the right non-engine cards to the next tournament you go to is super important in making sure you succeed. So with a brand new batch of decks that are super powerful and a whole new meta to look at, let's go over what the best non-engine cards are in the new meta. I've broken this down into 5 different sections, and again, I'm trying to mess around with the tiers we used, because making tiers in Yu-Gi-Oh! As S tier, A tier, whatever, it doesn't really give a comprehensive list of what we're trying to get across as we analyze the meta. Obviously, when you're talking about side deck and main deck, there's going to be overlap. Some cards can really apply to both, and stay tuned as I mention them verbally. I obviously won't have the card in multiple positions in the final tier list, but if you're ever unsure, you can you go back to the video and hear my explanations, because I'm going to try to be as comprehensive as possible when it comes to the actual reasoning behind any of the cards. So first up we got here is Call by the Grave, a classic staple here, and something that I didn't rate too highly on the last list, largely in part because it wasn't fantastic going first for specifically impermanence. We were in a largely Snake Eye dominated meta, so while Snake Eye is still a absolute driving force in this meta game, we have seen its, I guess, quantity of Snake Eye decks drop rather drastically, and Call by might be getting better. It's still rough versus Imperm, which is probably one of the shittiest feelings, is when you have Call by into an Imperm and you really need it to resolve. But as far as being a defensive card go, it's still rather okay. It can have uses versus Tenpai, albeit it's not amazing. Versus Snake Eye, using it defensively is pretty good. And even for stuff like Melodious, it can be all right. But that being said, it never really excels at anything either. So if your deck has a vulnerability to Ash, then Call by is phenomenal. However, if you find your deck more weak to cards like Valor or Impermanence, then Call by is a little more risky. It still could potentially be worth the spot in those type of decks, but when you're measuring on your non-engine, it's not the highest priority card, whereas it would have been in something like Despia. So right now, this is a main deck maybe for me, but context is very important to this. If you're playing a deck that's weak to Ash, like Melodious, like Tenpai even, where Imperm Valor does almost nothing versus you, then I think Call by is well worth consideration. I would not play it in everything, so that's why I would not put it in the main deck must section. Next up, we got Mistaken Arrest, a card that always kind of surprises me how good it is when people play it, but it's never really accomplished this mainstay dominance in the meta. And especially as some Summon Anti-Spell have been hit and more the actual floodgates are leaving the scene, we're looking for new cards that really fit the bill to replace those. Mistaken Arrest is great because obviously stopping searching is really good. Most decks can't play through it super easily. Now, that being said, they can get through it through stuff like Diabell Star setting. The original Sinful Spoil will still work. The Chandra Tenpai will still work. The Voices cards can still play from deck, but without being able to search, those abilities are less impactful. So if you have anything alongside to go with it, then it should be good. And the upside of this supposed deck lockdown, which would stop those, is you can relieve yourself of any weakness to cards like Phoenix or SP Little Knight. Both of which, could be a problem. So I'm quite fond of this card. It's not a card I've actually played in any of my decks yet, but every time I think about it and I'm analyzing it for this tier list, it ends up feeling a lot stronger than I think. This card is not like a main deck or side deck must. Obviously, this card is terrible going second, so I don't think it's ever worth a main deck slot. It can only ever be relegated to the side deck. But because there's so many other good options as well, and not every deck can want to use this, I put this in side deck maybe. Next up, we got Anti-Spell Fragrance. Good old Anti-Spell at 1. With that type of logic, it's at 1, and this card was so powerful before, maybe we should always play this card in the side deck, right? It's broken. Well, I still don't think that's true. If you remember, I didn't really think that card was that insane last format, largely in part because of everyone playing hand traps. And we still are in this hand trap dominated meta. We'll see later how highly I rate the hand traps, but it leaves Anti-Spell being pretty useless a lot of the time. Now, there are times where this card will solo your opponent's hand if they're playing a specific type of deck, or even if they are playing something like Snake Eye or Tenpai, this can get there. However, this is by no means safety versus any of those decks. The engine and the monsters are just powerful enough that this card can often be invalidated. You always have to back it up with something, so if you get like double hand trap and have Anti-Spell, that's not enough to feel safe, which is immediately a turnoff for Anti-Spell, being like the floodgate of choice, especially because there's so many other cards you could pick. And then just there's not enough spell-heavy decks for it to be really where I want. If Tenpai Boardbreaker was the version being played, and the Snake Eye Boardbreaker version being played, and Despia Boardbreaker being played, then Anti-Spell would probably be one of the best cards in the game. However, I think this card is only a side deck maybe, because yes, it still has many strong ways of being used going first, but it's not like this foolproof strategy that will always close out the game, except versus some decks. And again, yeah, there are those some decks where this card is just brutal, right? Like versus Melodious, the Pendulum base deck, you cut off those, and you're also cutting off immediate Ostinato access. This deck will just crumble. Like, you could get double hand trap versus Melodious, and then this is probably just enough to hold them off. But if we're building our decks mostly around the premise of Snake Eye and Tenpai, which is what I would be inclined to do, then yeah, I'd want something else. And with floodgates, you want them to be diverse, because you don't want to play like 9 floodgates in your deck for each matchup. You want to play like one that you can do for each for everything. And anti-spell, you know, wouldn't be good enough for Snake Eye. Although I think Snake Eye actually is very good versus a lot of these floodgates. So we'll get into that though in a bit. Next up is Ash Blossom and Joy Spring, a card that I really don't think is as good as everyone else thinks it is, but I think at this point in time, this card is still just super important. It may not be the best hand trap out there, but it is very strong nonetheless. It's great when you pair with other hand traps. It's great in grind games, which happen in hand trap wars a fair bit. And with the rise of Melodious, I think it's fantastic in that matchup. It's fantastic in the Despia matchup we're seeing a lot of. It's fantastic versus Labyrinth. There are many matchups where this card is killer, like bonkers. And then it's just still good versus Tenpai. It's still good versus Snake Eye. And with all that being said, it should be a main deck must. Now, obviously, this is the caveat with main deck musts, is that if your deck is not designed to play hand traps at all, then no, I don't expect you to play Ash Blossom. This is for the general deck here. It's just that right now we are going to see most decks being hand trap oriented, or if they have only a couple engine spots, they'd still probably only have hand traps. But yeah, Ash is up there. Next is the Black Goat Laughs, a card that I was very excited for when it came out in Phantom Nightmare, but it's really done nothing. And even in its main, I guess, deck you'd expect in Labyrinth, it's not been super good. It's just the card isn't super impactful. So stopping your opponent from summoning a monster, its on-field effect is solid, but if you have a trap to set, then there's so many cards that are better. And then as far as its graveyard effect, stopping a monster's effects from being used, it can be useful to play into a field with like Black Witch, discarding it off. That's honestly the best time I've had using it. But discarding it off like a furniture piece is disruption. It's just like Effect Veiler, but you have to combo it together. And if you don't have Effect Veiler, like if you don't have a way to discard it, then it's just worse than Effect Veiler because you can't even use it. And when that's the case, it's kind of just not very good. You'd rather play like any other hand trap over it. Now, being a trap card is still nice because you get some synergies with Arius and with Backjack, but I don't think it warrants enough for this card to be played. And that's just in the context of Labyrinth. In other decks, I really don't see it being too great. I did see that Josh Schmidt played this in one of his Runic decks, and that could give me a little more hope for this card because, as I said, I thought the best time when I was using this card was in the Crystal Beast deck, where I would use this aggressively to break a field, where I sent it off Black Witch or a Foolish Burial Goods to try and turn off Key Negate, like Skull Guardian or Appaloosa, cards that if they held would otherwise be really troublesome or were almost Floodgate-esque, like Appo in that case. And seeing it in like mill-based strategies or discard-based strategies being used more offensively, or rather if you don't need to use it offensively, you can hold them as a trap. So they're not bad going first to mill, going second to mill. Then there's real promise there. So I'm curious to see if that's how the card evolves. It's not how I initially thought it would be used. I really thought this card would be a Labyrinth card, but that being said, right now, I think it's not worth considering. It really is niche to just those decks to even consider, and I wouldn't call it a must by any means. Next up is Forbidden Chalice. So this is something I did tamper around with a bit, but I think Board Breakers just aren't in a fantastic spot right now, and I think there are playing Breakers that are better cards than Chalice. I think Droplet is a decent position because there's not too many cards that would turn off Droplet, as well as being able to just power through multiple different things. Now sometimes obviously Chalice can be better than Droplet, but you know, Droplet's immunity to effects just makes it supreme in so many scenarios. The only time you want to use this if you're going for a full-on board breaker strategy, because then like what I found, at least when I was playing a board breaker Tenpai deck, was one of the most important cards to cut off was the IP into SP line. So Chalice was very good at breaking that down. And if you go first, Chalice wasn't completely vulnerable either, like something Dark Ruler or Lightning Storm was. So it was a compromise there. But that was really the only case I found this card to be effective. And then I found that strategy overall to just be more underwhelming than a hand trap variant. So I'd say this card is not worth considering. And maybe I need to make a second tier in the future for cards that are not worth considering and cards that are unlikely to be considered, because both of these have merits. By that merit, although I guess almost every single card on this list would have some sort of merits. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't include it. There's no real discussion around a card that is just outright terrible. Next up, we got Dimensional Fissure. So this card is something that I didn't include on last list, but I think is actually relatively strong. Every time it's been used against me as a Snake Eye opponent, it's been troublesome. And I mean, I can't be alone in just Snake Eye having a problem with this card. You know, any deck that has a graveyard necessity, these type of effects are always going to be good. But you know, my biggest fear with these type of cards is they're only going first, right? And again, we've talked about this, how if you have them in this Floodgate, you want it to be supreme in the matchup or be very widespread in its usage. And Defisher is not completely widespread, like it's not fantastic in a lot of matchups. However, like I played versus Pearly and this card got activated against me when they were going second, and it actually was pretty good. And that's what kind of made me like ease up on the card a bit. I think this card has a lot of usage going second. And I'm actually going to talk about Gravekeeper Inscription here around the same time, because it's similar. And I saw Steve Santoli go X2 and get not on top, unfortunately. Now Isis Raleigh with Inscription, because yes, it's going first, but you can play going second. And versus Snake Eye, it actually does help, you know, help break through the field and cut off the follow-up, and then also like means their next turn play is going to be so much weaker, irrelevant if they have the follow-up or not. These cards have been relatively impressive to me because they are good going first and going second, and that is really what you're looking for in a targeted matchup card. So if your deck can play these cards without this, fear of your grave just being shut off entirely, then these are worth considering. I wouldn't say these cards are musts, because even if you can use them, there might be something else you want over them, or you already have too much for that said matchup in the deck. You need to focus your side deck on other matchups, because again, this is not a general use card. Yeah, I think these are solid side deck musts, and I don't know why I picked up that. Here we go. I think that anti-spell might honestly be worse. I don't know. Like, I think these are like almost side deck musts if you can play them. I don't think they are just yet. So put them here for now. Next up is Dark Ruler No More. And if you asked me about a week ago if I thought this card would be on this list, I would say it is not worth considering, because I think it is rather ineffective in a lot of matchups. Snake Eye decks, they weren't putting up negates for spells anyways, because Baron and Savage are being banned, so there were better cards you play than Dark Ruler. Giving up your battle phase in the matchup is very, very bad. Obviously, versus Tenpai, Dark Ruler is awful. Decks that would make you go first, you'd rather have an effective card in, so you would never main deck this card. Like, it's also just terrible going first if you win the roll and draw this, so it's really only a main deck card in like very, very niche scenarios. Why would this card be playable? What it is actually pretty good against is Voiceless. However, a lot of cards are good against it too. Then when this deck got the second coverage, and now it hits Melodious. And it's a deck that honestly is seeing way more play than I expected. I was going to make a video about I was being wrong about that deck, and it was actually decently playable. But beyond it being playable, it's also just very popular. With all that in mind, this deck is just everywhere, and it is a deck you should be addressing in your side deck to some extent. Even if it's just D-Barrier, that is something, but this card is very good against it because it'll cut off the Etoile and it'll cut off the Schuberta, and then you can start cleaning up the field. The Arius as well, and then you clean up the field, and then like you don't need to kill that deck. You can set up your own field, cut up their follow-up. Like if you hit the scales, I feel relatively comfortable. Now, obviously, they still will probably have hand traps to back it up, but a lot of decks are already designed to beat hand traps, just being the nature of the format. Yeah, I think Dark Ruler is a decent spot because it has those two okay matchups. That being said, I don't think it's anywhere near a must. It is very much like bottom end maybe. You'd have to really identify that need for the Melodious and Voiceless matchups. Now, it is playable against other decks like Snake Eye. It is very dangerous against Snake Eye because you need to make sure you can set up enough of a field and cut off the follow-up enough that this card is okay to use. You also have to keep in mind that if you Dark Ruler them and the IPs and spell trap cards on that temple, because they'll bring it back. So still have the Princess, it still have SP Banish, and then the tag out on SP, which can all be very relevant. However, if people are playing cards like Harbinger now, and other spells as board breakers would be less effective, then Dark Ruler might be the new way to go about that. I just really would not consider this as a prime way to beat Snake Eye, but it has more applications now than I guess it did before. Next up, we got Book of Eclipse, a card that I honestly thought wouldn't have been that good, but after watching it being played and having thought about it some more and then using it myself a little more, I was very impressed with it. Now, this isn't a hand trap, so it immediately falls victim to just being in the worst position in this format. However, with Baron Savage being banned, spells are more accessible, and this one is great in the sense that you can use it going first. And that is a big problem with these spell decks. When you go first, is you get hand trapped and you get stuck with these spells in your hand. You need to defend yourself, and they don't do the job. Eclipse does. Eclipse is tempo, however. It is really bad value. If you're using it as a defensive card, your opponent will draw 2 or 3 cards. And sometimes that's fine because you're just going to kill them with tempo the next turn, but it is risky. You really will only have 1 turn to do anything left. But if you weren't going to get a next turn anyways, because that is, how Yu-Gi-Oh goes, then this card will get the job done a lot of the time. And now as far as breaking boards this card goes, versus the Synchro version, I think it's pretty effective at dealing with it because you'll put the Flameburge and the Dispotter, and that'll cut off the IP to link into anything, and it'll also stop Princess, so fantastic. And if you play versus a regular Snake Eye field, if there's Harbinger, it's in the gate, which isn't great, but it's okay. But either way, just booking the Flameburge, making it hard for IP to link is a solid interrupt. It's nothing amazing. But I also think it is good versus Melodious because it forces the Etoile to be used, or they don't chain it and everything goes face down, and you can deal with the board anyways. But either way, it just forces any sort of interruption from them, and I think that's pretty good. And versus Tenpai, if you go first and you have this card set, they go battle phase, you go Eclipse, they get some draws, but they'll be passing there. And that's fantastic. That's exactly what you're looking for in a card versus Tenpai. I talked about it in my How to Beat Tenpai video. This is budget Daruma, but you can use it going second. So I think this card definitely has main deck merits. And now you could side deck it as well, but I think at that point I'd almost consider main decking it because this card has great coverage. It's not weak going first or second really to any huge extent, and you can pair it with other cards rather effectively. It's not limited to once per turn either, so if you have multiple copies, you can really push forward that way. One of the biggest problems I have with this card is its weakness to Ash, however. So it's kind of shitty that if you get into a spot where this card is your pivotal key winning card, it is weak to Ash Blossom. Not brilliant, but yes. I put this card in the high main deck maybe section. Now, not being a hand trap means I can't really confidently say it deserves a main deck spot guaranteed. Like, I don't think anything really deserves a main deck must. outside of hand traps in this format, but it is absolutely a strong card. And I think if you're just putting this card in your side deck, consider putting it in the main deck as well, because if that's the reason you have it in there, like if you found the merit for it to be in your deck, I think move it straight in. Next up is Change of Heart. So I wasn't a big fan of these cards before. With Fire Kings a lot more in the meta, Kieran was a big problem for steel cards, as well as they just weren't super effective, right? There were ways to play around them and mitigate the disaster here, but with Baron Savage again being gone, this is like a big key format difference in how the non-engine plays out, and people ending on Appaloosa very frequently. Change of Heart and Mind Control type cards are very good. I'm gonna talk about those cards at the same time because they're effectively the same thing. Snatch Steal as well. Now, just because you don't get just because they do slightly different things, I mean, they're all effectively doing the same thing. And now Snatch, I think, is kind of worse because even though you get to keep the monster, that almost never happens, and you think you risk yourself just being SP'd on the Snatch and your important monsters getting taken back from you. Now, obviously, if you're stealing Appo, then you can just stop that from being a problem, and you're still dealing with all the interrupts at once, which is, fine. So yeah, I mean, that being said, Change of Heart, Mind Control, the biggest weaknesses are you go first, then they suck. So main decking almost can't be possible. They're terrible with Tempai, so that's not a bonus side for them. Against the Melodious deck, not very strong. Versus Voiceless, they're not very strong. In fact, they're just unplayable versus both those decks. I don't know why I'm saying not very strong. They're just terrible. Really, the main thing you would be using it here would just be, Snake Eye. And are there better cards for Snake Eye? I really think you just want hand traps. If you lean into the breaker approach, then yeah, this card is solid to break Snake Eye specifically. I don't think that ever warrants it to be a main deck position. I'm gonna put these inside deck maybes. Again, if you're playing a breaker deck and you're really pushing this breaker thing and you want some more for Snake Eye, then I guess it would go up here, but I really wouldn't focus too much on that. Next up is Contacting Sea, which I honestly could have removed from this list. This card I can go over very briefly. It's not worth playing. You really only play this in decks that don't have a lot of ways to link off and use their monsters. And I guess you could play it in versus Melodious, but they can probably tribute summon over it. Yeah, I don't know. This card seems not very good. Melodious can just, if they open up, some of their cards lock them into Melodious, but not all of them do. So oftentimes they can just link this off for an SP, in which case you're helping them down a card. This card is just not good. Despia, hand trap, I guess, but the Sprint is pretty popular right now, and this Sprint does like kind of beat this card. It doesn't beat it; it lets you play through it, but whereas otherwise it'd be an auto win. I'm not loving this. You have an extreme weakness to Despia. Maybe you could side deck it, but like it's such a big maybe that I'm just gonna put it here. Next up is Droll and Lockbird. So this is one of the weaker hand traps from the last list, and I think that still remains the same. This card is so good in so many spots. Counterintuitively, it actually isn't that good with other hand traps all the time. It pairs rather weakly because it's like a max value. You want your opponent to search and then to draw them, but sometimes that leaves your other hand traps now to be ineffective. So it kind of has conflictions in that way. That's not ideal. Now with Nibiru, it's nuts, but I think with like Valor and Emperor specifically, it can be kind of weird. So I'm not the biggest fan of Droll in that sense. However, there are many times where Droll can solo by itself, with Cash Snake Eye being very popular, versus Melodious type of Snake Eye or Melodious Pure, it can be very good. And even versus the Pure Snake Eye deck or Pure Tempai, sometimes this can pull out the victory by itself. So Droll can carry. If there's ever one hand trap you draw, that is one that I can feel like I have a hope with. Or if I draw like just Ash, I'm probably just boned, at least against Snake Eye. And yeah, so I mean, at least Droll just being a main deck maybe. I think if your deck is playing this full suite of a million hand traps, then Droll goes up there. It's not like a must, because if you don't have the space for it, I think it falls probably 5th in line as hand traps I'd want to play, and not every deck can play 15 hand traps. So yeah, it's higher than main deck maybes. And again, like this main deck musts and maybe section are kind of blurred, right? Because if you have space like 20 non-engine, then a lot of these cards will get pushed up into the main. Next up is Summon Breaker, and I'm going to read this card out to you guys real quick because a lot of you may not know it from just the picture. This was a card we were playing as a sort of replacement for Summon Limit, and I guess it makes sense. It was an easy pick. It was just the one that was kind of, given to us. And it's a field spell card that says during the main phase 1, at the turn player safely conducts a third monster this turn and becomes the end phase. This is terrible. Don't play this. For one, it's only main phase 1, so if they do this in the battle phase, or sorry, in the main phase 2, it doesn't do anything. So at this point, it's just Threatening Roar, right? Like, if you don't want your opponent to attack you so they can't kill you with Snake Eye, you can just play Threatening Roar at this point. And that would at least be a little bit better versus Tenpai. If they go Phoenix or SP, I'll probably be Phoenix, but Phoenix on Summon 3. Summon Breaker is mandatory, so that's going to be Chainlink 1. Phoenix, Chainlink 2, discard target Summon Breaker. Nice. Okay, so this card is terrible. Don't play this card. This card is the most bait thing, but I just wanted to get that out of the way because there has been some discussion about it. I need to make it clear this card should not be worth your consideration remotely. Next up is Dimensional Barrier, and this is my first side deck must. I think there are some cases where you don't have the availability in your side deck for this card. If you feel really confident you're going first, like really confident, especially through hand traps and breakers alike, then you can forego this card. But this card is just incredibly strong right now. We've seen a lot of Fusion and Ritual NXT decks, right? There's Pearly, there's Chimera, there's the Despia decks, and then there's a lot of Voiceless and a lot of Melodious. And then Synchro decks, Senpai as well. Those three are the main ones. But there's just so much coverage. Now, the biggest weakness here is the arguable best deck in the format. Snake Eye just has no coverage against it. And that would mean you want to have multiple side deck cards for going first. But like, I think you need it because Barrier is just so incredibly powerful versus these decks that it's worth it. And it lets you focus so much the rest of your deck on beating Snake Eye because you have this card that is overwhelmingly auto win in these matchups that it's okay. You just can't understate how powerful this card is. If it's ever playable, it's just bonkers. I really hate that this card is still illegal, as much as like I don't play decks that play into it right now. It is also a decision factor in why I don't play those decks. Like, this card is such a decision factor in how the meta shapes out. It's one of the most overwhelming cards in the entire game. That being said, the not coverage for Snake Eye and it being a trap card means you wouldn't really main deck it unless you're playing Labyrinth, but even then, I probably shouldn't have main decked it. Yeah, it's Barrier. It's Barrier. Yeah, what to talk about. Next up is Cosmic Cyclone. Another card is probably my next up side deck must. I think you're going for back removal. Cosmic Cyclone is in the best position right now. Now, why is that? Because you can play it going first, and it's a relatively strong option versus cards like Voiceless Voice versus Senpai. If I draw these going first, they are effective, and I feel relatively confident as using them as disruption, almost as much as any other card like Valor or Imperm, or even better, honestly, in those matchups. And then going second, it still does all the things you want it to. It can hit the floodgates like Deck Lockdown and a Spell Fragrance, Rivalry of the Warlords, hit the Runic Fountain, so it has all those applications as well. Now, versus just decks that don't have floodgates as much, but set a bunch of back row and then try and sit like that, it could be a bit worse than something like Lightning Storm, but I think its spread of good matchups is better. Its ability to be used going for second is better, and if you are leaning towards something going first, this is probably the best one. And I think the quick play spells in general are in a better position. A card that is similar to that I don't have on this list is Telement Heartbeat. It's a card that's been popping up a little bit as a side deck potential option if you wanted more cards Runic Stun, and then if you play versus Senpai, it does a similar job, right, where it helps you keep them off the field spell, which can be really important, albeit it is not enough to guarantee succession versus Senpai. So yeah, Heartbeat's under consideration. You do have to discard a card though, although not at cost. Twin Twister is similar, but it doesn't shuffle the card back, it destroys, so it has the immediate downside versus Runic decks versus Fountain. They can just chain summon Hugin and that makes it worse. Yeah, I think the quick play spells are in overall a lot better of a spot than the mass back or removals. As far as Heartbeat, MST, or Twin Twister would go, those would probably be in the side deck maybe section because they would always come after Cosmic. And I think, like, unless you really need to discard cards in your deck, which is unlikely, but like if you're playing a Rainbow Bridge, like 3 Rainbow Bridge, 3 Terrific Karma type tier decks, then okay, maybe you got me. Like, maybe at that point, it's worth playing 3 Heartbeats in your deck. Next we have Nemesis Flag. So this actually references 3 Nemesis monsters, but I think they fall relatively similarly in terms of scope. It's talking about the ability to search Nemesis Protos or Nemesis Corridor, which gives you access to Thunder Dragon Colossus. Now, I think this is a good side deck, maybe. I think this card really haven't seen enough recognition. I don't think you should force this, though. Let me say that very clearly. If your deck has to go very out of the way to summon this card, it is not worth it. It is, even if it is searchable, it is not super effective. If you can do it with minimal amount of extra deck spots, minimal amount of bricks, and very simple in your combo without too much required. Like I can do with just Snake Eye Ash, and all I have to do is play Sprint in my extra deck. I think that's okay because it gives you a way to play around board breaker decks. But if board breaker decks aren't popular, then that line still isn't very good because it's worse for hand traps. And if you draw Flag or Protos, for example, it is a bit worse than drawing a Floodgate, albeit they can still be, once you get them rolling, they're still solid cards. But I just think the ability to search these Floodgates really also invalidates a lot of the board breaker strategies. And I think that is worth merit to some degree as a side deck, maybe, because it's searchable, right? And it's not like playing some of these cards that are unsearchable that would invalidate the decks and really wouldn't be worth a side deck spot, where this would have been 1-2 side deck spots and very good. Now, if you have to consider Colossus versus Protos, I think Protos is overall in the better spot right now. There's enough attribute manipulation that I think you can call whatever you want to be relatively comfortable. And most decks are mono attribute at the moment, so Protos should clear just fine. Colossus searching and protection is obviously broken, but it requires a bit worse card in the main deck. I also think it is a little worse than Protos. As much as I love that card, it's good, but it's not as good. Next up, we got Ghost Spell. So this is a card that is like very low end of main deck maybes, or maybe relatively high end of side deck maybe. And what I mean by that is you would only remake this card if you have an abundance of non-engine spots and you really want more hand traps to the deck. I think this would probably fall in line right at the end of the playable hand traps here, but it's still playable. Versus Snake Eye, it has applications. Versus Tenpai, it has applications, albeit not fantastic ones. However, in the side deck, it sees a lot more success because it is very good as Voice's Voice. It has a plethora of targets, all effective, like Pre-Preparation of Rites, like Saphira. Against Despia, you can hit any of the cards that add back, like Retribution, Brandon Red. And versus Labyrinth, it hits Big Welcome Labyrinth, which is the best card in the deck. So yeah, I mean, Bell definitely has a lot of merits to it. It would be for specific matchups, and neither of which would be for like the big decks you're focusing on. So like when you pair it is when it's playable versus Snake Eye. It's like not great. So like this would be like if I'm playing 21 hand traps, maybe Bell goes in, or maybe it has to be 24 even. It's like really unlikely. So that's why I put in the side deck maybe section more likely. And then you'd put this in as an option to beat the decks where this card really shines. So a couple matchups, and that's about it. Next we got Dark Hole. So this talks about any of these monster board wipes like Regeki, Dark Hole, Kaiju Slumber. I think they are not in a good position right now because even though there's not as many spell negates, Harbinger still exists. Also, destruction from card effects through IP makes it rough. So like if you're playing versus Snake Eye and you Dark Hold them, the Apple will live, and then the Flameburge can float, and then the Temple will still bring out the IP, and you really didn't do much with your breaker there, so it's not gonna that match up. There's Tenpai, it's obviously a spell, you're going first, it's terrible. I mean, like, I guess if you make them go first, you Dark Hold them, and it beats Seal, like, congrats. Then the Field Swap, they just chain it, and they summon guy from deck, like, it's not that big of a deal. I don't know, Dark Hole sucks in those matchups. Versus Voices, it eats a negate, who cares? Melodious it's solid against, because Aria won't protect it. They'll be forced to use Etoile, and you clear the field, you force on the interrupt. So it's fine in that matchup, but I think there are a bunch of other cards that do the same thing. Versus Despia, this just doesn't do anything. Versus Running Sun does nothing. Versus Lab, it does almost nothing. Like, yeah, this card's just not worth considering. Next up is Sideframe Delta, a card that has relatively fallen off, but I felt pretty good about before, as its ability to stop spells. However, as Snake Eye kind of shaped up, it's not as reliant to spells. It's the Fire King version, and the boards aren't good enough that this card is not fantastic. However, it can be good for cutting off Crossout, cutting off Bonfire, brick them still, and hitting Temple isn't bad. I don't think this card is completely out of viability. I think we saw it actually in Raphael Reich's Weiss Rio winning deck, and I think people are just kind of sleeping on it. I think it falls in line with wanting more hand traps. So if you want to play more hand traps in your deck and you're running out of good options, this is worth considering. Now, obviously, you have the problem of having played Driver, but it's fine. I mean, you can just play Gamma alongside it, which is broken, but I can't say this card is a side deck must because obviously the implication of the one brick alongside it means its ratios don't pan out. And I guess on this topic, let's talk about Epsilon real quick. This card would be used as a counter to trap cards. So like Labyrinth is good against, but what do you really want to use this against is actually as a way to insulate yourself from D-Barrier. So you can always cross out D-Barrier as well, but another thing you can do if playing a fusion deck is you can activate a spell card like Ostinato, or just way to fuse first. Then if they bury you, you have this to back it up. Now, the problem with that, though, is if they have any sort of negate, like Ash or just Appaloosa, then this card gets invalidated and your entire play accomplishes nothing, besides putting bricks in your deck. And then also, like, there aren't always a way to guarantee you can fusion summon immediately. If they summon Cartesia, then this card turned off. Or if you summon Soprano, it's turned off. If you summon a Refrain, it's turned off. So this card just is not worth considering because it's not foolproof in its plan and its execution. And then it's also not super consistent. It's also super niche. If I'm willing for D-Barrier counter, you're looking for something, but I don't think that's it. Next up, we got Fenrir. So this is weird, right? Fenrir is a card that I really also hate on a lot. I don't think it's nearly as good as people think it is. However, in hand trap formats, it is pretty good because getting these simplified game states, you're both trading card, trading a card, trading a card. Both have 3 cards left. Fenrir gets another card immediately, so it's going to apply pressure on the follow-up if you can't be killed. And then also, if you hand trap them and then banish a card, it turns like it combos your hand traps into negate plus removal, which is what we talked about as being incredibly powerful. Now, it also manages face down, so that is even more of a bonus side, is because that's the absolute most premium form of removal. So yeah, Fenrir is fantastic. I'm going to talk about Tenpai engine here as well, and this is bridging into the cashier as well for another reason. When we're talking about non-engine, oftentimes you can bridge your non-engine away in favor of another engine, and like as it's a small supplementary engine almost replaces the non-engine in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. And it's kind of weird, right? Because how do you classify these? You classify them as their own deck, you classify them as their own engine. And this can go with Kashtira Snake Eye, because you are sacrificing a non-engine for this Kashtira card, and it's not an overwhelming Kashtira engine, and you're really not trying to accomplish any of the Kashtira's things. And the purpose of those cards is to help you really effectively push through hand traps. That's where those cards shine. And now Melodious is being used in the same way. So those two are engines. Where do they fit in here? right? And both of those things would fall under main deck maybes, I guess, because they really warp the entire way you build your deck if you are playing them, but they're good. I don't really know how else to discuss it. And where does that fall in with Tenpai? So Tenpai is like that, but in a even more weird case. Tenpai can be played on engine in almost anything as a sort of side deck option, because you can smokescreen out a bunch of your cards, and then now your deck has all these good tools to go second. And especially if your opponent's putting in a bunch of cards that would otherwise be terrible against you, it's gonna be great. You keep in your hand traps, whatever, and you move into this Tenpai deck and you OTK them. Now you could also play a lighter Tenpai package and try to search into it if your deck has some sort of access to it. I saw a cool PK deck that was trying to go like Cherubini, send Pydra, and then you Princess it back, which is probably a bit janky, but it's funny, and I mean, it's not terrible. Because if you draw the Tenpai cards, you can just, you know, do other stuff, bait interruptions, and then Tenpai, you're dead. Haha. There's merits to that. So I want to talk about that because Tenpai can be used not in the context of its own deck, in the same way that Cash Tier or Melodious can. And I think that one, you know, it's talked about, maybe not enough. And I want to discuss the potential of that. You know, I don't think it's, you know, a grand strategy because, again, this will take up a lot of spots in your side deck. So I'd say this is like a relatively middle of the road side deck, maybe. I think there's very potential that if Tenpai gets disrespected more and more as the format goes on, because it didn't perform as insane as everyone thought it did, then this type of strategy can get insane, as well as pure Tenpai. And now what I want to talk about briefly as well as on the topic of Tenpai is I know it didn't perform nearly as good as Snake Eye did as some of these last events in like Rio or the regionals, but in my tier list, I didn't say it was tier 1 in the sense it would top everything. It's going to be a driving force in the meta. And what that means is it shapes the decks around it. The decks that do well and the non-engine that is being played is largely reliant on what Tenpai does. So cards like Barrier, Threatening Roar, we're seeing people side deck for this deck. Those cards hit Tenpai really hard, and that is why they're only just pushing through the barrier a little bit in terms of high-level successes. But if people start disrespecting Tenpai because they think it's a bad deck, those cards aren't being played anymore, that's when Tenpai really, really gets powerful. So I'm looking forward to future events to see if people kind of start saying it's not worth playing cards for Tenpai anymore, and they get punished by, you know, this kind of dynamic. Next up, we got DD Crow. This is a low-end side deck maybe for me because it has uses, right? Versus Despia, it can be important to cut off Puppet Lock, but I think at that point, there's better cards to do the same thing. Versus Voiceless, I'd argue it's a bit better than Bestials in some cases because specifically when they have Diviner, they can Diviner send Trias to Diviner, and at that point, Bestials are unusable, so they special low from deck, they go Saphira, and then you have to Bestial the Saphira. And that's like not super good. It's obviously like not accomplishing too much. If they have any sort of extension, they have another field spell, a ritual spell, or if they already had the other continuous spell in play, you really accomplished zero. You don't love Bestials in that position where Crow is a lot more effective because Crow and the Diviner would cut them off of a lot more. They essentially accomplished nothing with the normal summon besides summoning a level 9 monster, and that is fantastic disruption. But again, Snake Eye, it is a rather ineffective hand trap. It is below Bell in my opinion because it doesn't really interact with Princess super well as terms of an extender. In terms of breaking field, it's definitely a bit better hitting through Princess, but that was mostly relevant towards the Fire King version, which has really fallen off a lot and shouldn't be a main focus of your side deck. Yeah, I think this card is just like very specifically you need to be worried about like Voices and Despia. Because like these may be a bit better than in some cases in terms of coverage, but I'm not super fond of Crow. Next up is Gamma Seal. All right, this is going to encompass all the kaijus and kaiju-esque cards like Santa Claus. I think at the current moment these cards are relatively ineffective. Your opponent's not ending on one towers like monster that much, one monster that's really overwhelming. So unless that becomes a large part of the metagame, this card really isn't that good. So I think this is simple, just not worth considering, not putting too much time into it. Next up is Duster, and I'm talking about Lightning Storm here as well in the same vein because while Lightning Storm can hit monsters as well, we already talked about Dark Hole type cards aren't being super effective. Duster and Lightning Storm, I think, are just very much worse than Cosmic Twin, MST, and I think like the consideration here is Lightning Storm can maybe bottom end of the maybe spectrum as well because you can hit sometimes Snake Eye cards, and that's like okay, and you have like the option of mixing up back row and monsters, and it can kind of line in with the breaker strategy. However, I feel like it's rather low value. There's just better cards to do that, as well as that just not being a strategy you should be going for anyways. I don't know. I really don't think these cards are very good right now. I think there's so many better side deck options. Maybe they're at the top part of the not worth considering. The merits are so limited here. There's very few decks you want with Lightning Storm. And Tenpai as well going second. I don't think this card is that good of a breaker. There are better breakers than this card. Versus Lab, they can chain Barrier, which is like your biggest problem anyways. The only card you're hitting versus Lab that's really going to be impactful is Dreaming Cannon, so I guess it's good versus that. Versus Flu, it's fine, but I'd rather have a quick play spell so you can hit the trap in the draw phase. They can also chain Featherstorm, so it's not good versus that either. Versus Voiceless, it's not that good. Yeah, no, these cards just aren't very good. Yeah, I wouldn't play these cards. Like, try thinking of a matchup you actually want them in, what problem they're trying to solve. And I'm hard pressed to find a scenario where I'm really interested in having Duster Storm. Even though it can feel really good resolving it to go +2, it's not actually solving anything I need to be solving. It's not worth the spots. Now, if you're playing Thrust in your deck, which isn't a great card right now, but maybe you are, then you can play one of these in your side deck. But I wouldn't play Storm, then play the one Duster. Next up is Phantasme. I'm gonna put this in as the side deck must asterisk here. It is very integral on your deck not being a very hand trap heavy deck. You want to draw the hand traps before Phantasme would have resolved, and I think there are like issues there. However, when you aren't playing too much of a hand trap based deck and your engine can be decent into the Snake Eye deck, then this card is great because you can kind of play through the field, and this card, it's a body up, they have to answer, it stops targeting, so kind of do want to deal with it. It also contests Apo immediately 24-24 going into a grind game. It's a body that can be turned into Typhon, which is relatively strong in that matchup, and sculpting your hand is just always good. And you can also be using it on your turn as well. When they bring up the IP from Spell Trap Card Zone, you can Phantasme again. When you have 2 Phantasmes, it's alive, as well as if it gets Ash the first time, it'll be live in that case. Obviously, at that point, it likely gets checked by an Appaloosa, but if you can pair it along with like a Ghost Ogre or a Chalice or a Droplet, that'd be pretty good. Or even if it just eats the Appo so it turns on its talents, that's also just fine. So yeah, the card has a lot of merits. I liked it in Lab a lot. I liked it in Fluve a lot. I'm thinking almost anything that doesn't have an abundance of hand traps. I think if you have like 9 or less hand traps in your deck, I want to be including Phantasme in my deck. But yeah, obviously if I'm playing a Snake Eye deck, then this is not something where I want to be. Next up is Lava Golem. So this falls in line with the Kaijus. However, it is slightly better. And why is it slightly better? Because Lava Golem in Sphere mode versus Voiceless specifically can hit the Old Man Sarvis and the Skull Guardian. And by hitting both those cards, you're hitting off multiple interrupts at once and turning off the ability to pop with the trap card. Where if you just Kaiju 1, they'd still have like at least 2 layers of interrupts, typically. The difference of 2 interrupts you're hitting with the 1 card here at the price of normal summon is usually a trade that's worth making, so it actually has consideration now as a side deck maybe. Giving me normal summon is still a very steep cost that not many decks can afford. When you can, they do have merit, and it's really only in that matchup. Melodious, it's okay, but it's not brilliant again either. You can cut off the double, the Crow and the Etwal, but that grind game is pretty good. Etwal thrives at cutting off your normal summon, so if you're already cutting off your normal summon for them, you can argue how good it is. Yeah, so worth considering, but by no means a must in your side deck. Next up is Crossout, and this is a weird one. I would have said this card was king last format. I really liked it, but with less Snake Eye decks, you aren't using this card as much. I think this is a main deck. Maybe if your deck is weak to hand traps, you can maybe put it in to deal with hand traps, but using it as a defensive trap card going first is no longer as foolproof of a strategy as it once was, and I think that leaves it ultimately a lot worse than it was. But okay, so another thing that's important to remember as well is as we're looking at cards to beat hand traps, because that's what you're using this for, Zone engine, cards to beat hand traps, we go back to the discussion of the existence of the Kashtira engine, the Melodious engine, these other engines here that serve the purpose of playing through hand traps, right? And though it seems weird to compare non-engine versus an engine, they're accomplishing the same thing, right? So we're trying to just set these two against each other, and it's not looking at what the cards are, it's looking at what the cards do. And in a lot of cases, the Kashtira or Melodious package is giving more gas as well to play through fields, doing better versus the field if you don't know what your opponent's playing, and then also just still doing the accomplishing the goal of letting you push through cards like Veil or Imperm. Then Crossout's validity as an option falls out drastically. I think if you're playing Pure Snake Eye, this card still is very good, but it has lost a lot of power behind it. Next up is Herald of the Abyss. This is a card that I really don't see the value in right now. One card we really be wanting to hit here. It can force Skull Guardian, sure, it can force Interrupt in some ways. You're really trading 1 for 1 here, the cost 1,500 life points, the cost of being terrible going first. This is very much in line with our Hole type card. Where was better was hitting immune cards, but probably is not enough in the meta for me to want to play this. This is safely just in the not worth considering position. Next up is Metaltronus. This card is a high up side deck, maybe potentially even a main deck maybe. Now, why do I like this card so much? So let me read this card if you're unfamiliar with it, because I didn't talk about it in any of my LEDE like tech card videos. I did talk about it in my Tenpai video though, so I didn't want to talk about it multiple times, but again, let me just go over it real quick in case you didn't watch it. It's a quick play spell card that came in LEDE. It says you can try to face up non-token monster on controls. Especially a monster from your hand, deck, or extra deck is 2 or more of the same type, attribute, and or attack, but negate its effects. Monster you summon, and then negate that targeted monster's effects. Also after that, if those monsters have the same name, you can banish both face down. The opponent will activate the targeted monster's effect in response to this card's activation. This card is fantastic. It is like a balanced way of droplet in the sense that you can target a card that has a negate and they can't respond to that specific negate to beat it. And it would negate the effect as well as summon a body. So that's incredible because it's a negate. So a push or 3 interrupt, also developing a body in the field. It could then be turned into a Typhon or just be used as general link fodder. And depending on what monster you're aiming to be targeting, and this is very, very meta dependent, you can summon a monster with actual value. And I talked about in the Tempai deck, if you're playing a Tempai Dragon Link deck, you target a Boarlord Savage Dragon, you can summon an Absol Dragon or a Rocket Tracer from your deck, which is insane value because now you're essentially activating Quick Launch while turning off a negate, which is incredible. If you're playing a tier deck or a hero deck, you can target a IP Masquerena with this card and then summon a Malicious from your deck. That is brutal. And then if you go first with this as a trap card, you're playing a mirror, they summon like a princess. You can go, all right, summon my princess, banish both of ours face down. And that really, really hinders their play. Or even Snake Eye Ash. Hit their Snake Eye Ash, and both are gone. And you essentially impermed while also getting rid of the body, which is nominally important when breaking the fields. Again, we talked about Gamma being king before. Removal plus negation is so powerful. That is why Voiceless is even a viable option. So, and then is what this card is accomplishing. So I think this card is very, very good. Now the thing is here is specifically this format, hand traps seem to be better positioned. If there were more good breakers I was really comfortable with, Metal Tronus would be in a way per spot. Yeah, this card is extremely powerful. And I really think that as we shift out of a hand trap meta eventually, this card will be fantastic. And if there is a World Breaker deck, the 2 cards that I'd probably be most inclined to incorporate are like Eclipse and Metal Tronus. These cards are just so good. But I don't think it's worth the main deck spot just like Eclipses. I think Eclipses has better coverage. This card is specifically not great versus Tempai. And then unlike Imperm Veiler, it's not as supremely insane versus the Snake Eye deck. Next up, we got Power Sync Stone, another floodgate that is being used to replace Summon Limit and the sorts. Let me read this card if you aren't familiar with it. It's a card that's popped up a couple times in Yu-Gi-Oh's past. As a continuous trap card that reads, each time a monster effect is activated, place a Spellstone counter on this card. While this card has 2 Spellstone counters, face monsters on the field cannot activate their effects, and their effects are negated. During each end phase, remove all Spellstone counters on this card. So the upside here is you can give yourself 2 counters by flipping this in the draw phase and then using effect. So like you're playing Snake Eye, for example, you can go like Flame Burge, target, and Snake Eye Ash. I put in spell trap cards on immediately because I knew I had, intentionally because I knew I had Power Sync Stone. And then summon the Ash, search off it, 2 counters, they cannot use monster effects in the field. Pretty good. However, they can also then bite you in the ass because now you can't use any of your disruptions now, besides Princess. So you're also turning off your own field, same way Skill Drain would. But then if your opponent starts playing through it and they end up on a field, in your draw phase, if they use 2 monster effects, now it cuts you off. Unlike a card like Skill Drain, you can't sack off for Ash for cost because you can't activate monster effects in the field. You can Witch, but it's not invulnerable. And that's my biggest concern. And I think I don't really have a great answer to how to solve that. I think there are just better floodgates in this card. I think this card can be turned against you a bit too easily for my liking, and that's why I'm not a huge fan of it. It requires careful navigation. Your opponents should know how to do it. Any plan that is not really foolproof like that is not something I'm super fond of. So I'm going to say this card's not worth considering. This card is better than Summon Breaker. It has a little bit more merit and definitely can solo games. But if your opponent has some experience in dealing with this card and has a reasonable hand, they don't even need to remove it to win the game. Next up is Super Polymerization. All right, so this is a card that everyone thought would be really good at the start of Fire format. Ended up being terrible. Has that changed? No, this card still is not good. I tried it again in Tempai. It just doesn't help breaking fields. It has a trap card. It's just lower efficiency than something like Eclipse. Using it early doesn't feel great because they can push through it. If you use it late, they can get forced by Phoenix. This kind of card isn't great. Using the extra deck slots is not good because there's so many powerful extra deck cards right now. Let's put this card in the not worth considering spot. I don't think any deck would really play this unless you are playing a deck like Despia, which has Elbaz to make all the Elbaz fusions. Like, you're not playing it for everything else. Next up is Symbol Archifiends. So this is a card that has gained a lot of notoriety lately. And again, let's take a quick read of what it does. It is a normal trap card that reads, this turn, neither player can special summon monsters with the same card types, Ritual Fusion, Synchro, Exceed, or Link, that they already control. If you do not control 2 or more of the same type or card types, all Ritual Fusion, Synchro, Exceed, or Link monsters you can currently control gain 500 attack. Only activate 1 per turn. So why would you play this? Well, against Tenpai, if they have the level 7 Synchro up, you can use this and they lock into synchros. Versus Snake Eye, if they have a link monster, they can't keep linking. Versus Pearly, if they have an XYZ, they can't keep XYZing. So in a way, it's almost like Barrier, but unit links. And now we approach the problem. It has the caveat of that they already have that card type in the field. So if they can go like kill off their level 7 synchro, this card, they can keep synchroing afterwards. But also like, if they just don't need to make level 7 synchro, like in Tenpai, for example, they can just go straight into Trident Dragon and you're dead. And this card did nothing. Versus Snake Eye, they can still play with other cards. They can send off with Snake Eye, Ochre, Ash, their Link, and then rebuild the Link chains that way. Kind of a problem. And then still at least make something effective. Yeah, I think this card just doesn't really do quite enough. It seems like it'll do quite a lot in a lot of matchups, but it has way more play around than D-Barrier. And you're never playing both this and D-Barrier. D-Barrier is so strong what it does. I know it doesn't have coverage for Snake Eye, but it's so good versus everything else. And there's no reason to play a card that has countermeasures built against it. And even for Snake Eye, I don't know if I want to side this card in. Like, it's not that good. So I think this card is not worth considering. This card is one of the biggest baits right now. Please don't fall into the trap of this card. While it looks very cool, if you play against it, there's so many cases where it's not very good. Next up, let's talk about another card that is good against Tenpai. And then another card as well. Thunder of the Ruler and Threatening Roar. Okay, so the point here is you cut off your opponent from being able to attack you directly, and Tenpai can't kill you. However, if you've watched my beating Tenpai video, I said these aren't great because even if they can't do this, they'll try and get you in a simplified game state, and you're helping them by necking cards. And if they've hand trapped you to a point, and they do this, they put up like a seal, they banish your grave with Ruddy Rose Dragon, and then they have like another hand trap, then you're still in a bad spot, right? And you traded a card for this. And I think this overall performs worse than Barrier in that way, as well as having 0 spread for matchups. It is solely in the Tenpai matchup, so I think these cards are not worth considering. I can't stress this enough. If you want a card going first Tenpai, it's just Barrier. Barrier is just broken. It's just Barrier. Play Barrier. Play Barrier. Marionette Might. This card should not be on the list. I forgot to take it off, I guess. This was on here before for Unchained. There's nothing in the meta that's Fiend-based, so this card is not worth considering. If you really want something for Labyrinth or Unchained, there has to be a better option than these. Especially Mind Control 3 now. Like, you don't really need Marionette Mites do. Deck Lockdown. Alright, so here are another side deck option to replace Anti-Spell. Now, if there's one that is a bit better, I think Deck Lockdown might be it. I think it is similar to Mistaken Arrest when I put it next to it. I don't think it is a must. Unlike Summon Limit, again, if you get caught under hand traps and you Deck Lockdown them, it's kind of hard to clear it yourself. If you have a Witch, you can, but again, Ash and Oak and Original Summon Spoil can't kill it, which is a problem. It means it's not like completely safe from these type of grind games. So it's like, yeah, I don't think it's anything brilliant. But it does still serve the good purpose of, like, if you make a decent board alongside this, you should be able to close out the game rather effectively, especially if you still follow. It's just that if you get caught, like, with your pants down and no like disruptions alongside it, it'll probably end up screwing you over as well, like most floodgates will. I think Summon Limit was a cool exception that it wasn't vulnerable to that. It's definitely, I think, better than the other ones, but I don't think it's, like, insane. Maybe I should put these both lower in the list, but I don't know. Next up is Eradicator Epidemic Virus. So I played this card on my Labyrinth deck, and it was just for Runic Stun, and just because my deck searched it. If your deck cannot search Eradicator, this card's not worth playing. There are better cards to play for Runic Stun. I'd rather just play the back removal. So I'm just gonna say this out right now. There's nothing you want to use this against. For Labyrinth, again, like, these cards aren't very good either. This isn't insane. Again, quick play spell removal would just be superior. So Eradicator, adios, not important. Next up is Awakening of Vados, or sorry, Vados the Ashen, or what is its name? It's Vados to something. Yeah, the field spell killer. We're not playing Ashen here, it's just kill field spells. How is it right now? There's another new deck, Tenpai, and it also plays field spell. It has Sangan and Summoning. Does that make Ashen Vados worth playing? Probably not. Still, I don't know. Like, it's honestly not a card that I've considered yet for the meta, and maybe my opinion has to change because it has a really cool hand trap against field spells, but don't know if it's enough. In those matchups, I probably want something else a lot of the time. Where it could be cool is if you have, like, a way to pop a card that targets in your theme versus Tenpai. You can do this, hit Sangan Summoning, and then say they push through it. You get a battle phase. The targeting destruction, like Dogmatic and Punishment, wouldn't do anything because they can just chain synchro. But if you target the Vados, if they synchro with it, which I don't even remember the level if they can synchro with it, but I don't think they can actually. But either way, if you kill it, or even if they synchro with it, or they link with it, it'll blow up the field. So it guarantees that the Tenpai opponent will be cooked. That could be an interesting take that I'm not thinking of. However, I'm trying to think of what deck would have that type of pop. And Punishment is the only one that comes immediately to mind. If this applies to your deck, keep that in mind, because that could be an interesting option as something that is not bad versus a bunch of decks, but also pretty good versus Tenpai. You know, because obviously Snake Eye Cashier has a bunch of field spells to start with, and this could be decent there. And pairing this card with, like, Nibiru is insane, and it makes breaking the board a lot easier as well, because they have like a nuke on their field. They have a landmine, and they pretty much have to stop you from triggering. Why I would put this card that I was considering, I want to put this in the bottom in the side deck maybes, and it's really a maybe, but it has some neat merits to it that I find it kind of cute. So I'm giving you too much credit, but yeah, whatever. Triple Tactics Talents. This is probably the best board breaker still. One of the best board breakers. I like Book of Eclipse a lot, but this is great because unlike Mind Control type cards, again, going first and going second applications. My biggest problem with this card, and it still stays the same, is like call by, when you get impermed, this card feels really rough because now you're playing a card down because your card doesn't work and you got negated. Like it is rough. And then inline board breakers aren't the best right now. But if there's a breaker that's going to do the job with stealing cards, then yeah, Talents is the best because non-targeting and it bypasses the IP and SP a lot of the time, unless they have multiples. Not multiples, they have just 2 monsters, and you know sometimes SP clear both can do it, but that's also fine. If they had like 2 effective monsters, then like clearing the 2 disruptions, the SP plus like an Apo is more than enough. But anyways, yeah, I think this card is still just a maybe, and it's a high up maybe. Like this is probably one of the best as well to pair with hand traps, right? Like if you're gonna play with hand traps, there's a world where you play like 15 hand traps plus Talents, because one, it lets you offset the hand trap wars a little bit, assuming it's not imperm, which is the biggest problem. And then also, again, in very simplified game states, the Talents steal, the non-targeting steal can just be really good. Or even just pot of greed. Draw 2 is good in a simplified game state for very obvious reasons. I shouldn't have to elaborate on that. I still think hand traps are king, and those will take over the top spots on the main deck must. Next up is Destructive, the Rumor Cannon, a card that I thought was incredible in my Labyrinth deck, and that was like the reason to play Labyrinth. This card's incredibly well positioned in this format. However, the biggest problem is it's not a card you can preemptively flip like D-Barrier, and then they can't answer it for the rest of the turn. It can be forced out with cards like Phoenix, SP, or back removal for whatever reason. However, its extreme efficiency and efficacy in every matchup is still worth the side deck spot, right? Because back removal falls more and more out of the meta, and it's unlikely this card will be forced out. I think Snake Eye, it's phenomenal. Versus Tempai, it's phenomenal. Versus Melodious, it's phenomenal. Its coverage is just fantastic, right? And you wouldn't consider something over Barrier maybe. I think Barrier is just so good what it does, but this like is really good too. And it feels weird to not play a Floodgate in this type of position, but the Ruma is really good. Like it's buying tempo, and it's the same reason why Eclipse is good. But this is a bit better because Dream will obviously go through the Sengen summoning if it's the main phase to send the monsters, which is even better than booking it. You can hit the links as well, so if they have a developed field of links plus monsters, it does that. It also beats Ash Blossom, can't Ash it. When it actually resolves, it's oftentimes better than Eclipse. But again, the going second thing is a problem. That being said, sometimes you go second, and this card can, you know, really get you into a grind game and be pretty good. Next up is Forbidden Droplets. Yeah, so this is a weird one we've been seeing pop up a lot, and this is probably one that would either be a side deck maybe or a main deck maybe, and it really can go either way. As far as breakers go, this is one of the stronger ones because you can combo it to clear multiple interrupts pretty well, as well as be used defensively, same way that like your Eclipse can. You go first and it's still effective. It doesn't lose to the Template card, same way Chalice does, because they can't just quick synchro to avoid it. They do quick synchro to avoid it because you didn't hit a monster, then you can hit the synchro monster, so it's still okay. Yeah, this card is good. However, it is not a hand trap, and then just puts it at disadvantage, right? You want to be playing this high number of hand traps, and Droplet doesn't fit too well into that. Also, Droplet, when you have a bunch of hand traps, you're giving up all these resources, and you may not have enough cards to discard for Droplet. That can be kind of annoying. However, plenty decks can use this card very effectively, and it's a very good side deck card versus stuff like Melodious, like versus Despia can be pretty good, versus Snake Eye can be okay, versus Tempai can be okay, versus Voices it's pretty good. So yeah, I mean, it's overall above average across the board. It's just that hand traps are the same but better synergy with each other a lot of the time, and oftentimes there are cards that target specific matches better. But Droplet's a fine card, and you can also argue it to be in main deck if you're going aligned with this breaker strategy with like Metatronus, Eclipse, Talents. Next up is Infinite Impermanence, and I think this card is probably the best card in the meta, or one of the best cards in the meta. Being immune to Talents, being immune to Callby, being immune to Castrating Unicorn Extra Grip, being immune to Apo if they develop that first. Like if they do the Melodious combo and they go Apo then Banshee and you imperm the Banshee, they could still just lose, even if they have just the Apo. Yeah, this is very good. It's just phenomenal. Going first, it's fine, and then going second, it's just the best hand trap. Effects Veiler and Imperm have both been very good, but this is just less vulnerable to anything, and that makes this card king. And I really don't like hand traps that much. Typically, it's not my style of Yu-Gi-Oh! I like playing Break the Board. Imperm is just the best card right now. Veiler is very good too. Now, Veiler or Ash being better, I'm not sure. Now, Veiler obviously has the bonuses that Imperm does, but can't be used going second when you draw for turn. It also loses the Unicorn, or doesn't lose to it, but it's vulnerable to Unicorn and Talents, and it loses the Callby in these ways that Imperm doesn't. So it is a clear step down from Infinite Impermanence, but it's still very good. And these are kind of like the three that I think are just very important. Pressing forward, we got Book of Moon. So by the logic of Eclipse being good, can Book of Moon be good too? Well, I tried it, and the answer is no. Part of the reason Eclipse is good is like if an opponent goes to battle phase with Tempai, you can Eclipse them and they can't go quick synchro because whenever someone gets booked. Book of Moon is the opposite, right? Like if they go synchro effect, you go to book chain target, They go chain the other guy quick synchro, and your Book Moon does nothing. Versus Snake Eye, sometimes hitting the Flame Burst is the same as I would with Eclipse, but it's only that scenario. It doesn't meet the spotter line because it still have 2 monsters you want to book as opposed to 1, and that's not useful. Going first, it's also probably worse. Even though you're not giving your opponent draws, you are not hitting the tempo as much. You're only hitting 1 monster, and that is a meaningful difference. So, because you're playing for tempo, they're not playing for value. Like, it's very rare you are playing for value. And if you're playing for value, then there's probably better cards to play than one of the books either way. So I'd say this card's not worth considering. And you can really see here how these cards are not always equal in terms of value or close to it. Before with Cashtira, right, where the actual booking aspect was a super important part and just 1 monster was all you needed, these cards were close in terms of power. Now, I don't think it is. Eclipse is where you want to be. Next up is Ghost Border. All right, so I think this card is not actually insane, but it's still a hand trap, and it pairs well with other hand traps. And sometimes you hit a Diabell Star and it solos. Hand traps are still king right now, so that's why we're on the Mourner train. But I think it is worse than a lot of the other ones, so it's just going to fall below that in the ranking order. But it does the job of hitting hand traps, stopping Snake Eye from comboing off, and that's the driving force for building your decks around. Occasionally, it'll hit other good cards like an Albion or a Low off of Diviner. Like, it's okay, but the main purpose there is to hit like Black Witch or in tandem other traps caught off the Snake Eye player. Next up is Bestials. This is weird. These are at the top of the side deck maybes, or maybe at the bottom of the side deck musts. They're weird, very weird. I think I value these cards less than a lot of people, but I still value them. And now what I mean by that is this card has several applications. You can play this against the Snake Eye deck, and hitting the IP Mask Arena is actually pretty good because then their interrupts are a lot worse while giving you a body that you can then turn to Typhon or link away. And with Magnum, search a Jewish Worm, or Jewish Worm send another monster, it applies pressure. It also could deal with Appaloosa if you need to get to a grind game, like just attack over it. So it has a lot of merits, not something to be undervalued. And then versus other decks as well, versus Despia, obviously everything's dark, it's good. Versus Melodious, there's some targets like when they go Baka, Revive, Bestialaire is fine, as well as being a body on field, which is always a plus side. And versus Voiceless, it's solid too. You hit Saphira a lot of the time, or if they go like Tribute Low for the ritual and then low effect Revive. Now Voiceless has pretty solid counterplay to Bestials. It's not like you can always resolve them, so don't think like this card is a god card versus Voiceless, and that's part of why I was skeptical to play it. I felt like I want to play something for Voiceless. Bestial's not my first thing that comes to mind. This is better as a spread where it's solid versus a bunch of things, and that's where you can consider even main decking at that point. Like at that point, just main deck it. However, I think it is worse going first than other hand traps. The reason why it's going second is that you link up with the Charmers really well. Going first, obviously the Charmers are a lot less effective, as well as getting a target for this is a lot harder because putting your own like Lights and Arcs in the Graves in a fire format is kind of hard unless you access the extra deck if you're getting hand trapped. So yeah, maybe it doesn't fall in the main deck because that's only a going second card. So it is very close here, and I think it might just be my kind of position this card is overrated, or the Bestials are overrated. And I say overrated, I don't mean they're terrible, but like they're not as good as people think they are. I think they are solid in a lot of positions, but a side deck is not for just for range. It is also for targeting specific things down and brutally like countering them, like D-Barrier. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think Bestials really are where I want to be. Next up is enemy controllers. So again, we're fitting in the line of the quick play spells that are good at breaking boards, but we can play them going first and they're okay. And every time I tried this card, it was just not good. It's not good as Tempai. It's not fantastic in a lot of cases, but the only time it is good is in the Snake Eye mirror match specifically. I think this card is probably not worth considering. Like, it has merits, but every time you think about why you'd play this card, there's just a better alternative. And I don't think you can afford enough spots to where you'd want like 3 Mind Control, Snatch Steal, Change of Heart, 3 Talents, 3 Econ. Like, maybe, but I'd be surprised if that's how you wanted to go. Next up is Rivalry. This is one of the kings of the formats, one of the main deck musts. You have to be able to play this card. Let me preface it with that. But I think this card is just such an auto win for Snake Eye that I want to play this in any deck that can. And now maybe that is foolish of me. I just like, you win games when they full combo with Snake Eye because of this card. I know, yes, there are matchups it's bad and like Tenpai, and that just does change the dynamic of this card, right? If those decks all get more and more popular, Melodious too, then this card really might fall off. For the time being, especially like, I just like one card that auto wins for Snake Eye is so rare because that deck is otherwise so hard to beat that I almost want to play it. That also makes me wonder, do I play it in Snake Eye then? Because I was siding in Snake Eye. You can see in the round 11 Raleigh feature, Brendan testing part of Dominic Couch flipped it because we worked together. He flips up the Rivalry despite getting 3 hand trapped, and his opponent's hand is insane, but he just can't win. So we figured we can decide on going first or second. You go first, you flip it up, and then they lose. Can't do anything. They don't have back removal in their deck, and then you send it off Ash, you win. Game 2, you flip it up, you clear the field, they pass back, you send it off Ash, and you can win, hopefully. So if it works in Snake Eye like that, maybe you just main deck it. I guess like if you're not really not expecting Snake Eye at all, this card's a side deck option still, but I think the Rivalry is just one of the absolute craziest cards in the game right now, because it's the only card that really feels like it dominates the Snake Eye deck so decisively. And one upside to the Cashier version of Snake Eye is a bit of a ability to play around Rivalry. I did lose to a Cash Snake Eye setup in what's it called in Columbia when I was playing Labyrinth, because he had Fenrir for Rivalry. But the way I was able to position it is it forced him to end his turn pretty much after the Rivalry was gone. He had to use all his resources. It just, unfortunately, my lab hand was terrible. I drew like Lord of Heavenly Prison for turn with no traps left, and I had 2 Nibirians in hand. And maybe I shouldn't have had Nibiru with Rivalry in my deck, but at the same time, Rivalry's at 1, like. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't auto win because he had Fenrir, but also at the same time, if any of the 3 cards in my hand were live and did something, the 1 Fenrir would have been pummeled by whatever I had, or could have prevented the Fenrir. I think just Rivalry's insane. I'm gonna stop ranting about it. It should be given by now, but I just wanted to say I think it's better than people give it credit for, which says something, because people didn't think this card was bad. Next up was Lance, a card we've seen a while ago, being used to beat, Kashtira answers. As that format's changed and spells are bad and hand traps are king, this as the counter, this is like the equivalent to Callby and Crossout for spells. Now that those have phased out the meta, these cards are good again, and Lance is just all the way at the bottom. It'll have its time again, but now it's not it. Next up is Exceed Encore, and we ask ourselves what Exceeds are being played right now. Snake Eye may have Harbinger. I'm not playing this for that. Tempai has nothing. And those are the driving forces. Okay, so this has to be then for specific rogue deck or what a side deck for. What would it be? It is only Pearly. Is this a card you want to play for Pearly? It might be. This card might be okay if you really want to target Pearly, but I don't think Pearly is very popular at all. I don't think it's even that good. So I would say this card is not worth considering. Next up is Grave of the Super Ancient Organisms. So this is a side deck maybe here. I think this one is a bit better than Contact C, what it does. Now there is some counterplay here for the decks that lose to it, like Despia, but it's not super easy to counterplay. And this is like, if you have a weakness to those matchups, this is the one card that can like carry them going first or going second. And that hasn't changed. That's been the same concept that's been for a while. Retaliating C. Yeah, so I saw some people talk about this as a way to beat like Melodious on Ostinato. Or Concerto, or I mean that's cool. And versus Despia, it's okay. I saw people say Voiceless as well, but that's pretty fake because it doesn't hit Saphira. I think this card is like, I don't know, like if you really want to target Melodious, I guess this is a viable option. That's all it would have to be, because the only way to fuse after that Soprano. But there's no way they don't lead Soprano. Like that's not really a viable play. So yeah, I mean, if you really want a card from Melodious, I guess this might be it. I was gonna put this in the not worth considering spot, but like it has a bit of coverage with and then the Melodious answer as well. And maybe this card falls in like the low side deck maybe spot where very specific counter, but it does its job effectively in that case. Next up is there can be only one. So what are we hitting in this format with it? Not Snake Eye. That deck is immune to it. But in the same way, Rivalry is now getting less and less good because of Melodious and Tempai being played. Jacobo ruins those decks. So this card, I think, might go into a side deck maybe, or side deck must even. I honestly hadn't considered it, but like I had it on this list from last time. Now that I'm considering it, like if I'm playing Snake Eye, I can side this card in against these bad matchups. And even if my deck just doesn't lose to this seems pretty good versus Tempai and Melodious. Is it a must in a deck that can use it? Maybe. It's just better than Barrier in some of these matchups. I'm gonna set a set on that, right? It may be bottom here, high here, but if you can play Takobo, it might just be well worth playing. First Lab is great too. First Voices is not great, right? Because they're a mix of things like Skull Guardian's Warrior and Lowe's Fairy. Yeah, that's not good. Maybe it's too targeted, just Melodious Tempai, but those decks have really grown in popularity. So we'll have to see. This is like at the current time where those decks are very popular. That's what's on my mind. We'll see. Consider it. Next up is Kurikara, and this is going to be the exact same as Exceed Encore. It's not the exact same, but what are you hitting with it? I think people using it in the matchups where you can like hit Apo and then summon a body. It's not that really coming up. I was playing 3 of it. The reason to play this is you can search off Snake Eye Ash, and that's like, okay, it's a side deck option to beat Pearly. If you want to play that, it's better than Encore. And then versus Kashtira, it's actually pretty good because Fenrir, Unicorn, Rip, and then you go sack off both, put 45 up. Then if you have a little bit of other attack, you can actually kill them. And then if not, you go end phase, revive their Fenrir, and that's like actually meaningful. So yeah, this card is okay as a side deck option. It would really only mean Snake Eye, and even then it's not a mandatory card, but it definitely is a card to consider. So yeah. Next up is Evenly Matched, a card that I absolutely detest. Yeah, no, this card is poo. I don't know what you're using it for in this meta. I really don't. Same as the mass back removal. It's not really accomplishing much. Versus Snake Eye decks, even for battle phase is really bad. Same as the Dark Ruler argument. You can hit some of the resources away, but they still probably have Apo, they still have hand traps, still follow up. So I'm putting this card in here. high end and I was considering because it can go plus, but that's not the goal of what you're trying to do here. Maybe versus Melodious, it's okay. No, it's not. They're staying at 12. Like, it's the same as Darkhold where you give your battle phase. Next up is Gozen match. Still fire format. Melodious is all dark. Not all dark, all light. Voiceless is all light, right? Yeah, this card is terrible. Right? What do you, Labs all dark? Stun obviously is terrible. Yeah, it's nothing. Skullmeister, another hand trap. Originally, the thought behind this was you could use this to break through fields, hitting cards like Princess, but we aren't going for a board breaker. Fake hand trap in that way. So, not that good. And then as a board breaker, all it does is hit Princess, which we've learned isn't even that impactful in a lot of the matchups, and some combos don't even go through Princess. So, yeah, throw this card to the not worth considering section. Next up is Iblis. So, again, we're looking at replacements for Summon Limit and S cards. Floodgates going first. Is this a viable option? I don't want to give up the extra spot. I don't want to give up normal summon. And none of the decks right now, I want to give up a normal summon. Yeah, I'm going to say no. Not worth considering. No, there's better cards. Not giving you normal summon for that. If we get hand trap, they can just summon a monster and link it off, right? This is carded. It's really good as board breakers, except drop it in Econ, because you're cutting off the ability to Lightning Storm a lot of the time and evenly match. I mean, and Perm. I don't like this card that much in general, but yeah. Ghost Ogre. So this hand trap is the weirdest. Now, I said on the last tier list, it was a sleeper pick, and I think it still is. It really didn't see popularity, but it kept on growing popularity now, and now it's really approaching mainstream. And I think this is a main deck maybe card, and I think it is around equivalent to Mourner. And now, why is that? I think it is a bit worse than Mourner as a defensive card. However, it can be good as a defensive card solely when paired. By itself, it is abysmal as a defensive card. However, hitting a temple with it is fine. Hitting an Appaloosa is fine. Like you go Nibiru, they go Appa, you go Chain Ogre. Perfect, that's fantastic. There are applications in that sense where it is good. However, unlike Mourner, they can't go like Special Witch, Mourner, and then sometimes that's enough to win the game. This won't have it won't ever have the chance of being enough as a solo card. However, when it can be good is rather on the next turn then. Say you just draw it by itself. Okay, it's fine. You have a hand of all engine, maybe a breaker alongside it because your main deck can eclipse your talents. You draw it. Okay. Its weakness is Appaloosa. And you can't really ogre Appaloosa that much because of IP existing. So again, that also matters for the other line I mentioned where you go Ogre Nib. Keep that in mind, that IP being a main combo link into Appo makes it kind of hard. But say we're in that position and we're trying to break the field. If we can force the Appo and then Ogre it and it's not IP, that's a fantastic trade. It's better than Chalice. Or if we can get rid of the Appo, they can mind control or it just doesn't, they don't have it for the way that you hand trap them or and it's whatever reason. Then Ogre can be good hitting IP, and it's really good hitting IP there because it cuts off the SP, gets rid of the body, and yeah, I mean just the Chalice thing in that way, but also having applications in the other sense. So I think this card is great because it has this very varied usage, and then other matchups as well. Hitting the Tempai field spell is very good to the point where it's arguable that the Tempai players should not be using its effect to search a lot of the time. And then versus Voices is very good as well because hitting the barrier search is fantastic. It hits its follow-up in that way. It hits the consistency because you can choke them sometimes on the search. And then you're also hitting the non-target protection, so it makes all your other effects a lot better now as well. Fantastic card in that matchup. And that's why, like, I wanted a card for that matchup. I was citing Ogre before, not Bistral. So I think Ogre was just better. If you wanted both, then that's fine, but Ogre was just insane. Yeah, I'm curious to see this card just keep growing in play. And nothing to do with Fire King Island, which is ironic, because that's, like, the initial reaction people have when they thought of this card months ago, but it's actually just bad in that position. It's good in other positions. Next up is a Spellbound, a card we were considering a lot before as a going first option, as well as going second option to beat Flu and Pearly. Flu and Pearly are really fringe, so unless you really want to focus on those cards, those aren't valid reasons. As far as the going first card, the Snake Eye cards can be able to sack themselves off, really to make this not great. You can argue maybe versus Tempai, this does something, being unable to synchro, and this should bypass the Sengen summoning if I'm correct, but maybe I'm wrong. Just correct me there, because it's not something I've researched at all. Maybe that's decent in that matchup, but again, if that's all you're going for, just go for Barrier. Like, if you want a worse barrier with worse matchup spread for the sake of having a better Pearly and Flu going second, I don't think that's worth it. So yeah, I'm gonna put this in the not worth considering section. It's not completely abysmal like something like Skullmeister, but it's not like good either. Next up is Skill Drain. I think this is a side deck maybe, like one of the highest as well, like very high end side deck maybe, because this is an example of a card you can play as a Floodgate, and then if you're playing Snake Eye deck, you can sack it off and play afterwards. So when you get hand trapped, you can set it, and it should buy you the turn, and then be able to keep going afterwards without hindering yourself the same way Deck Lockdown does. So fantastic card. I think Rivalry does it better. I think Skill Drain also is worse going second. Sometimes going second with Skill Drain can clutch up, but if Skill Drain is all you have, it's not going to solo the same way a Rivalry often can. And yeah, I think it's a good Floodgate in a lot of cases. I mean, first most decks, Skill Drain should be rather solid. I don't know what else to talk about. It's a good card. And I think if you're considering Floodgates to go first, this is one of the best. Obviously, it's not lingering like D-Barrier, so say like Summon Limit if they can clear it, Cosmic type cards. That's why I consider maybe Daruma instead. If you don't, if it's still just a tempo based thing, then this could be better. Both could be viable. If you go into a grind, obviously the one Daruma may not be enough. This could be better. I think these are a lot more similar than people think, in the sense where they're just buying the one turn tempo without really hindering yourself too drastically. Next up is Solemn Judgment. Yeah, so we played Strike and Solemn Judgment potentially in the last format, because you get into hand trap wars, they're okay. But the more I think about it, I think like Daruma can be the value that this can, while also being tempo if you need to be. So it's either or, and I think also is better matchup spread right now. So I think this card is like low end of side deck maybe, because in the hand trap wars, the value of the Solemns and the breadth of what they hit is still valuable, but there are oftentimes just better alternatives in the card. That being said, still almost nothing compares to how powerful they can be. If you're playing a deck with powerful floodgates, monsters, or runic stun, or whatever, or weakness to any one card, then it's a viable option. Next is Magnamud. I don't know why I talked about this differently than Judas from last time, but I already talked about Bestials in length, so I'm not going to do it again. Next up is Shifter. So, I mean, this is the same every list. I don't know when this will change. It's crazy this card wasn't broken for the first, like, 2 years on its release, but if you can play this card, you should play this card. This card is, like, it's just past turn. Like, so Snake Eye Pure does have, like, ways to play around it in some sense, where they can go IP Temple, which is not actually terrible, and then Tempai can do Trident Dragon as, like, it, but neither are super effective under Shifter. Yeah, I mean, this card just does a lot. And even if decks can perform somewhat functionally under them, it does so little that I think this card is just still brutal enough that it should be in your deck. Next up is Nibiru. So I think this is probably the fourth best hand trap. I mean, it's arguable where it should be among these four. I think Imperm is for sure the best, and these next three all have pros and cons alongside them. If you're going with the hand trap lineup, which I think is the way to go right now, then Nibiru should be along the suite of other four. By itself, it's not going to end their turn. However, unless they misplay, but what it can do is still weaken their board. So if they play through it, they're still going to have some stuff, but it's going to be weaker, and that's okay, because if your hand is all engine now, as long as it's not filled with bricks and multiple copies of cards, like I lost because I had Nibiru, but then double pop or double ash, like Snake Eye Ash, like that obviously sucks. But my hand was like if my hand was like Snake Eye Ash, Bonfire, Wanted, for example, and then Talents, then the Nibiru would have been fantastic. Because even though it's not pairing with a hand trap there, it's softening up the field a bit for me to then power through it. So even by itself, it's not as terrible as people may have once thought it was. But when you pair it with other hand traps is when it shines, right? Because you choke off some of their ways to, mitigate Nibiru, and then Nibiru comes down, and it is brutal. It is definitely the best hand trap to pair, for sure. It always has been. It hasn't changed. And yeah, I'm not gonna talk about it because we've talked about it for months, how Nibiru is the best card to pair. Next up, we got Thrust. So Thrust should fall in line theoretically with Talents. However, the biggest thing about board breakers, and you see me talk about it, is its inability to be used going first is a huge downside. This card, I think, should only ever be in the side deck and as a maybe. Why? Because sometimes it can be used to break fields, and if you have powerful spells in your deck, like Ostinato, then it does have a little more merit, because you can get engine, you can get non-engine, which is effective. And then post side, if you get hand trap, which are very popular, versus a lot of decks, you can set cards like D-Barrier or maybe even Daruma Cannon, and that's good enough. It has solid reasoning to go in side decks. Is it for sure a side deck spot? No, because if your deck doesn't have a lot of spells to search, you're playing a hand trap based deck, then it's not going to be in there. Like if you're playing Snake Eye, your side deck's not full of spells, your main deck's not full of spells, this will have no space in there. But if your deck has spell cards and also has like something like Daruma or Barrier you want to search over going first, then I think it does fit kind of nicely in line with what you want to do. So specifically like Melodious is where I may see it when you played. Despia as well. The Despia is just a board breaker deck, so that makes a bit more sense there. Well, even a hand trap deck like Melodious, I think Thrust can be fine. All right. Dinosaur Wrestler Pankratops. That's not the name, but whatever. Again, it's a board breaker, so my positioning on it's gonna be rather low. I thought this card was better last format than I think it actually was. Like rarely it trades for two interrupts, but oftentimes it requires your battle phase, and you really don't want to be doing that. So I think this card is meh. All the times it can maybe serve the same role as Ghost Ogre, but can't be used as a hand trap as well. So it's just worse than Ogre in that sense. I can't move good into the voiceless cards, so yeah, this card is probably just not worth considering. Next up is Ghost Reaper. I probably should take this off the list. This card has not gotten better at all since last format, and it was not worth considering last format. So yeah. Last up is Ultimate Slayer, a card that wasn't really on my radar until Emre got top 16 Oasis Rio with this card, and it was solid. I think versus Snake Eye Field, hitting the Appaloosa versus deck that's weak to Appaloosa, sending the Live Twin card, which can then clean up something else, non-targeting, is really impactful. So if your extra deck isn't tight, or you can afford even just one spot for it, and then you can, and your deck has a problem with Appaloosa, this is a great solution because it deals with it while also cleaning up a little bit more. So trades value pretty well. Now, obviously it has the attachment of needing the extra deck spot and the brick in the main deck, but the flexibility is pretty good on the card, and I think it is a bit better than I initially gave it credit for. Is this card an absolute must? Nope. It is only for specific decks. Identify the problem of being Appo typically, and this might be a decent solution. Low end to side deck, maybe. I think Fluid definitely made sense in, but it's not like an insane card. Anyways, that is the final thoughts of the list. Let me know if you guys like this format. I know these videos are always long, but this is a way of giving you a comprehensive analysis between this and the last video of where my head is at in this current format. Now we have done a month before Weiss's Indie, and then a new set and all that for the WCQ, at least in Europe and North America. So stuff will change. Formats are volatile, they evolve, and they adapt constantly. So even with me posting this video, I'm sure people will see some of these stuff, and then card lineups may change a bit to reflect the new opinions. So if you're watching this a month from now, just keep that with a grain of salt and try and track how things went. Pay attention to the reasons I gave for each of the cards, because that's going to be a big indicator on how their evaluation would change as the format's positioning changes as well. Yeah, if you enjoy these type of videos, just let me know, because they, you know, a fair bit of work to make. It's been an hour and a half of me sitting here and talking like a goddamn lecture. But yeah, like, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.